Welcome to the Awesome Possum Classroom. This is a grade 4 lesson. Worksheets for the story are available if you like and follow me on YouTube. Email me at awesomepossumclassroom@gmail.com to receive worksheets. Because of Winn Dixie is written by Kate D. Camilio. This is a 7-video series. This is day 1, where I will only introduce you to the skills, introduce you to the vocabulary, and the first read, which is the teacher read. In future videos, you will be taught the skills that go along with the story, and there will be comprehension questions that go along with the story. Let's learn a little bit about the author, Kate. Kate grew up in Florida, where the story takes place. She wrote Because of Winn Dixie during the first time in her life that she did not own a dog. Kate believes that looking closely at the world and paying attention are the most important ways to become a writer. Our target skills for this story will be to examine characters, setting, and plot. I will introduce to you character, setting, and plot as we read the story today. The genre for this story is realistic fiction. Realistic fiction has characters that are like real people and events that could happen in real life. Realistic fiction has a plot with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Lesson 1's vocabulary words are comfort, mention, mood, properly, intends, consisted, positive, advanced, peculiar, and talent. These stories in the Journey series that we're using, the vocabulary is usually in what we call in context. Most of the time you can figure out what the vocabulary word means by reading around the vocabulary word. Let me give you an example. The word comfort. Friends often comfort each other. They help others get through hard times. Well, what does comfort mean? It means they help each other through hard times. When someone is sad, you make them feel better. And that's what this means. They help each other get through hard times. Let's look at the next word, mention. Do not mention one's friend's faults to another. Keep them to yourself. Mention means to say something, to speak. Do not mention one friend's fault to another. Keep them to yourself. So you're not going to say something about someone. You're not going to mention it. You're going to keep it to yourself. The next word is mood. Friends remain friends even when one is in a bad mood or an emotional state. A mood means an emotional state. Properly. Friends often greet each other properly. A handshake is the correct way. Intends. This girl intends to keep in touch with friends. She plans to send an email every day. Consisted. This lively day consisted of or was made up of bike riding and fresh air. Positive. These friends are positive that they're having a good time. They are sure of it. Advanced. With his advanced chess skills, this man can teach his young friend to play. Peculiar. Friends may act in peculiar or unusual ways when taking photos. Peculiar means acting in an unusual way. Talent. These friends share a talent for music. This ability gives them hours of fun. Let's take a moment to look at our target skill, story structure. As you read Because of Winn Dixie, ask yourself what the most important parts of the story are. The story's events make up the plot. Look for details that help you picture the setting or where the story takes place. Keep track of the new characters as they are introduced. You can use a graphic organizer like this one to help you. Now, I don't use this graphic organizer to help me chart the plot. I use this one over here. And let me introduce this one to you before we go into the target skill of summarizing. When I ask you to chart the plot, you'll get a graphic organizer that looks like this. I'll ask you to put the characters and the setting. Now remember, you only want to put the main characters here. You don't want to put all of the characters, just the main characters. And then the setting is where the story takes place, when the story takes place. You'll chart your rising action, problem, climax, resolution, and falling action. Remember, the rising action is the beginning of the story. A lot of times your rising action will be 1 or 2 sentences explaining who the characters and the setting are. That should lead you into the problem of the story. The climax of the story is when the conflict of the plot is being resolved. It is the most exciting part of the story. It's right before the problem is being solved. After the climax will come the resolution, or how the story or how the problem is solved, and then usually there is a falling action, how the story ends. So you have your beginning, here is your end, and these 3 go in the middle. The problem is first, then the climax, the most exciting part, and then how the story is resolved. Now, when you take this and you put it in your own words, you can summarize the story. When you summarize the story, you tell who the characters are and you briefly retell the main events. And that's kind of what this is. A summary has to be written in your own words. This can come right from the story if you'd like. This is the last thing I need to go over with you before I begin reading you the story, is we need to preview the topic of helping others, which is the theme of this story. Doing favors and helping with chores and volunteering for community projects are all ways of helping others. Sometimes we can help others just by talking or listening to them. Because of Winn Dixie is a story about how one person can make a newcomer feel at home in a new place, and how the characters interact can show readers what it means to be a friend. All right, I'm going to begin reading the story to you. I want you to sit back and just listen. 10-year-old Opal is a newcomer in the town of Naomi, Florida. She hasn't made any friends yet and feels a little lonely. Opal's only pal is a very big dog named after the grocery store where she found him, Winn Dixie. I spent a lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little old house full of books, and Miss Fanny Block is in charge of them all. She is very small, very old, with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started with Winn Dixie not liking it when I went into the library because he couldn't go inside too. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look in the window and see me in there, selecting my books. And he was okay as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Fanny Block saw Winn Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself, and when all of a sudden there was a loud, scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Fanny Block sitting on the floor behind her desk. "Miss Fanny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear," she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He has come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn Dixie standing up on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. Miss Franny Block, I said. "That's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog, Winn Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "I'm positive. He's my dog. I would know him anywhere." Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said. "Let me help you up. It's okay." I stuck out my hand, and Miss Franny took hold of it. I pulled her up and from up off the floor. She didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady mistaking a dog for a bear, but that she had a bad experience with the bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she never quite gotten over it. "When did that happen?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, it's a very long story." "That's okay," I told her. "I am like my mamma in that I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn Dixie come in and listen too? He gets lonely without me." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs are not allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "He'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn Dixie, and he came in and laid down with a humph and a sigh right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him. He most certainly is a large dog." "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "He has a large heart, too." "Well," Miss Franny said. She bent over and gave Winn Dixie a pet on the head, and Winn Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffed his nose up on her on her little old lady feet. "Let me get a chair and sit down so that I can tell you this story properly. Back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big that they could fly away with you," Miss Franny Block started in, "and I was just a little girl no bigger than you, my father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday, anything at all." Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in close to me. "I don't want to appear prideful," she said, "but my daddy was a very rich man, a very rich man." She nodded and leaned back and said, "And I was a little girl who loved to read, so I told him, I said, 'Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful.'" "You asked for a whole library?" "A small one," Miss Franny nodded. "I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we are sitting in now, and at a very young age I became a librarian." "Yes, ma'am." "What about the bear?" I said. "Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days?" Miss Franny Block said. "Uh-huh, you did. It was wild. There were wild men and wild women and wild animals. Like bears? Yes, ma'am, that's right. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-it-all. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my library full of books. And oh, yes, ma'am, I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday I was sitting in my library with all the doors and windows open and my nose stuck in a book when a shadow crossed my desk. And without looking up, yes, ma'am, without even looking up, I said, "Is there a book I can help you with?" Well, there was no answer, and I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman, scared of all the books and afraid to speak up. But then I became aware of a peculiar smell, a very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. "How big?" I asked. "Well," said Miss Franny, "perhaps 3 times the size of your dog." "Then what happened?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, "I looked at him and he looked at me. He put his big nose up in the air and sniffed as if he was trying to decide if a little Miss Know-it-all librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there. And then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I am not going to let it happen without a fight. No, ma'am." So very slowly and very carefully I raised up the book I was reading. "What book was that?" I asked. "Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book." I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully, and I threw it right at the bear and screamed, "Begone!" And do you know what? "No, ma'am," I said. "He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him." "Nuh-uh," I said. "Yes, ma'am," said Miss Franny. "He snatched it up and ran." "Did he come back?" I asked. "No, I never saw him again." Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They used to say, "Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book, and he said it sure was good, and would it be all right if he kept it just for another week?" "Yes, ma'am, they did tease me about it," she sighed. "I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine I'm the only one that even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they are all dead and gone." She sighed again and looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town, not having a mamma to comfort me. I sighed too. Winn Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. He sat up then and showed Miss Franny his teeth. "Well, now look at that," she said. "That dog is smiling at me." "It's a talent of his," I told her. "It's a fine talent," Miss Franny said, "a very fine talent," and she smiled back at Winn Dixie. "We could be friends," I said to Miss Franny. "I mean, you and me and Winn Dixie. We could all be friends." Miss Franny smiled even bigger. "Why, that would be grand," she said, "just grand." And at that minute, right when the three of us had decided to be friends, who should come marching into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library but old pinched-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Fanny's desk and said, "I finished Johnny Tremain, and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read now because I am an advanced reader." "Yes, dear, I know," said Miss Franny. She got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't there. She stared right past me. "Are dogs allowed in the library?" she asked Miss Franny as they walked away. "Certain ones," said Miss Franny. "A select few." And then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and no one was going to mess that up for me, not even old pinched-faced Amanda Wilkinson. Before we end our lesson today, I want to go over a couple skills with you, point of view and flashback. Let's do flashback first because it's the easiest one. Authors sometimes tell about an event that happens before the time in which the main story is set. This is called a flashback. Think about the story Miss Franny tells Opal. What event does she tell about and when did it take place? So a flashback is a memory. So Miss Franny tells a memory she had when she was very young. She was sitting in the library and a bear came in, and she chased the bear away. The bear took the book, and then she was teased by all of the men in town. That's a flashback. That's her memory. Point of view. Point of view is the standpoint from which a text is written. When a character is the narrator, the story is told in the first person point of view. The narrator uses the words I and me and my. When an outside observer is the narrator, the story is told in the third person point of view. The narrator uses the words he, she, and they to tell about the characters. Now, let's look at this first paragraph. It says, I spent a lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. Who is the I in this story? The I is Opal. Opal is telling the story. It's in the first person point of view. First person point of view. Now, you can still use the words she and he in the story, but they're not telling the story. Opal is telling the story, and she's using the word I to refer to herself as. This is the end of lesson 1 for Because of Winn Dixie. You have 6 more videos to complete for this story. Don't forget you have worksheets to complete with each video, and they need to be turned in to me on Friday. If you do not have access to the worksheets and would like to access them, like the video and subscribe to my channel. Email me at awesomepossumclassroom@gmail.com.